I'm Hillel Resner. I'm the president of the Mix Foundation. I welcome you all here tonight. This is the fourth year of the TECnology Hall of Fame. That's TEC, and it's tech, as in technical excellence and creativity. I don't think I have a whole lot more to say other than to thank the sponsors this evening, which is the new AMP Alliance at Microsoft, our friends at Discmakers, and the Conservatory of Recording Arts and Sciences down in Phoenix, who've all been very generous with us the last couple of years. So without further ado, I'd like to present the executive editor of Mix Magazine and noted audio guru himself, Mr. George Peterson.
We started the TECnology Hall of Fame 4 years ago as a spin-off of the Tech Awards, because every year the Tech Awards is like, hey man, we got new products. Aren't these great? And most people that are walking around the show are going, hey, can you make me something that looks like the old stuff that was great? Yeah. And there's the audio history is so ignored, that there are wonderful stories, and there's about how our history evolved from Thomas Edison doing the first cylinder recorders up through the latest digital workstations and such. So the idea of doing the TECnology Hall of Fame was a way of preserving some of that and really giving a nod of the hat to some of the amazing products that made our industry what it is today. And we're going to celebrate that tonight. And our first inductee went by the name of Leon Theremin, which actually wasn't his real name. His real name was Lev Sergeyevich Theremin. He invented what he called a novel method of producing sounds and musical tones. And of course, if anybody knows anything about a theremin, the function of this musical instrument is to move one hand to control pitch, another hand to control amplitude, and you're kind of doing this kind of crazy dance, and the weird science fiction sounds are coming out. One of the great people who was inspired by the theremin over the years was Bob Moog. He was so inspired by this that both Bob and Bob's father made theremins and sold them, and Bob continued the tradition. And still, Moog Music still makes theremins today. Our next inductee, Chester Rice and Edward Kellogg, who from General Electric Company, who in 1925 came up with the concept of the modern dynamic loudspeaker. Up till then, all loudspeakers involved some sort of horn apparatus. The interesting part about this loudspeaker that you're seeing here is that how little it's changed to today. We're still using paper cones and voice coils, and one of the innovations that they came up with was taking the paper cone and surrounding it with a ring of butyl rubber to give it more resiliency, which, guess what? We make them that way today. They also talked about the importance of the speaker baffle in the idea of a speaker box, keeping the front motion of the loudspeaker from interfering with the rear motion of the loudspeaker, which is the basic tenet of enclosure design. And they also talked about the need for larger amplifiers and came up with the concept of headroom. They said, there'd be much less distortion in this audio if we actually had an amplifier that had enough headroom that it could actually reach the peaks, which were capable by the design of their loudspeakers. So we'll move onward to another gentleman by the name of Walter Weber. And Dr. Weber, in 1932, he was a Siemens engineer who was recruited by German Broadcasting. And they wanted this man to come up with a way of improving the quality of the magnetophone tape recorder. And at the same time, BASF had come out with ferric oxide tape. And suddenly the magnetophone was starting to become a very serious recording product. But Walter Weber took it one step farther by applying the concept of tape bias, AC tape bias, improved the quality of the early magnetophones in 1939 to a frequency response of 10 kilohertz. He also came up with a design for the dual diaphragm capsule, which was the first unidirectional condenser mic, which eventually became the Neumann M7 capsule that was used in the U-47. Neumann's stereo disc lathe in 1956 actually was not really the first stereo disc lathe, but it was certainly the beginnings of the best stereo disc lathes. They came up with a system with a preview head on the source tape deck, and the preview head would look at the waveform coming into it, a half revolution before the record cutter cut it, and they could adjust the pitch on the record grooves by the incoming signal feeding it, and were actually able to adjust the pitch in real time before it actually happened in the record cutter, which allowed longer play for the LP. The original stereo cutter head was improved significantly, leading to the world standard SX45, SX65, SX74, and SX84 cutter heads that followed that are really still considered the state of the art in a stereo cutter head. And I believe we have a representative from Neumann here who could accept the award for the Neumann team for developing the AM32 record lathe in 1956. Wolfgang is from Neumann, Berlin.
You see, 1956, that's a remarkable date because it's this invention or this development was done a few years before I was born. So I really take it as a heritage from the engineers who used to work for the Neumann headquarters in Berlin, where I come from. And I can only hand it over to our engineering team today. One of our engineers who really developed a lot of details on disc cutting lathe systems is not in the room now because he is working in an AES standard committee right now at this time. This is Mr. Kern. Mr. Kern, who is, I think, known to a lot of people here in the industry, worked on this disc cutting lathe system quite a lot. He's with us since almost 40 years in the company, and he developed this system really time after time, year after year. And what I know from our engineers is that the whole disc cutting lathe technology had so many patents which were registered under Neumann's name that it is really, I think, the most complicated mechanical system Neumann had ever developed in the entire history of almost 80 years. Because Neumann was founded in 1928, so next year we're becoming 80 years old. And you see I'm accepting an award which goes back to 1956. So on behalf of the Neumann headquarters in Berlin and my team there, let me say thank you to everybody who made this possible. And even when we are not able to listen to vinyl discs anymore, the old ones, but currently produced vinyl discs are rather seldom now. And I still think I like my vinyl discs, although there are sound cracks and things like that when you listen to them. But sometimes you remember the good old times, and not everything which is old isn't necessarily bad and old-fashioned. So thank you for your attention.
This is not the first Nagra tape recorder. In 1957, the Nagra version 3. Stefan Kudelski founded his company in 1951 and wanted to make tape recorders. In fact, the name Nagra itself, he was of Polish descent, and the name Nagra means will record. Anyway, he started making high-quality portable tape recorders in 1951. Came out with the Nagra 1 and Nagra 2. It's hard to believe these days, but the Nagra 1 and the Nagra 2 were actually spring-wound models. After fleeing Poland during the war, his family settled in Switzerland, and he founded his company in Switzerland, certainly. The Nagra 3 arrived in 1957. It was a 3-speed tape recorder capable of 50 nips, which is very good. And it also had a DC servo motor. It did not need a clock spring-wound mechanism to operate, which is pretty amazing. And it also incorporated the germanium transistors as part of it. The previous Nagras were actually tube. So you had tube products that were spring-wound. Now, this gets us back to the real days of analog here. And I haven't seen anybody doing a repro of that, even in a plug-in form on the show floor. And in 1963, they added NeoPilot Sync to it. And the Nagra series kept getting better and better and became the world standard for location recording for motion pictures. In fact, it received the Nagra 3 received a Technical Academy Award in 1965. Our next award comes in what we believe is 1958. And it would be easy to just go, oh great, here they're giving a Hall of Fame award to a connector. But this is a pretty amazing connector. And if you think, any of us that are old enough to think about the connectors that existed before XLRs, where there were Amphenol 4-pin and Amphenol 3-pin, and I don't know where this one goes, and I don't know where that one goes, and Tuchel connectors and DIN connectors, it was pretty much a nightmare. And Canon came out with this wonderful XLR connector with 3 pins, which could lock together. So if you wanted a longer cable, Instead of just, well, we have to make a 50-foot cable, you say, hey, I got two 25-foot cables. And there's also 4-pin connectors that are used for power, AC power. There's 5-pin connectors used for stereo mics, multi-pin beyond that for tube mics and such. And here to accept this award on behalf of Canon ITT, or actually Canon Company, now owned by Canon ITT, is George Blazis from ITT Canon.
Like my previous colleague here, same thing. I was not born when the connector was first originally released. Right now, it was made here in the United States, but it's been transferred over to our ITT division in Japan, where they're manufacturing all our XLRs and XLM style connectors. So it is still around in its original format for those of you that still want to use the original design on some old technology or some equipment. So thank you very much.
And thank you, and Canon for attending. The Fairchild 670, which, and it's still considered the absolute holy grail for dynamics control. I guess when they sell them on the used market for $35,000 or $40,000, that has something to do with the cost per pound, because this is a 65-pound unit with 20 tubes, plus 21 if you count the rectifier tube, and 14 transformers in this beast. And the inventor of this is right here with us today, and they're still out there, they're still worshipped, and maybe he knows where I can get one cheap. Let me say a few things about Rain. Here's a man who is Estonian descent, who in the post-war years worked for the U.S. Army, of all things, as a broadcast and recording engineer for the Nuremberg war trials, and did such a terrific job of this. I guess he caught the attention of the UN. Is this correct? So it's written somewhere. We'll claim it's true. The UN brought him to America, said, hey, this guy really knows audio. And he came to America, worked for the UN, wound up co-founding Gotham Audio and Gotham Recording in New York City. Later on, this other fellow, Les Paul, had an 8-track recorder and didn't have a console, and so he needed somebody to build a console for him. And he found out this smart guy named Rain Dharma and said, hey, Rain, can you build me a console? And he said, sure. No one's ever built an 8-track console? Sure, let me build the first one. And he built this wonderful console that Les still has working in his studio even today. He started building a limiter for Les. One of Les's friends, a guy named Sherman Fairchild, dropped by Les's house one day and found this boy genius sitting at the kitchen table working on a limiter and said, hey, you look pretty smart, you can make limiters. Want a job? And I guess Rain said sure, and he was immediately hired. And he never did finish the limiter he was building for Les. And Les has the parts in his basement. So I think when they got together here, we're talking about it, I think Les says, I paid you $40 back there to finish that. And I got the parts, so. So there might be another Fairchild original being created in the next couple of months, once we've got these guys together. Anyway, we're really thrilled to have Rain here today. Please welcome Mr. Rain Dharma.
First of all, thank you very, very much for this award. I've been in the audio business as a person and for quite a while as a professional for a very long time. About 60 plus years, because I'm 84 years old now. Now, some of what was said is true.
At least some was true.
Right. Actually, life was more complicated. As a refugee near the end of the war, the organization I ended up working for was United Nations International Refugee Organization, had various names, UN Refugee Organization, then it's called International Refugee Organization, etc. That's where I got my actual recording experience. I went around, recording equipment wasn't available then. I bought whatever was available, modified it to make it usable. And with the Jeep, went all around Europe, from refugee camp to refugee camp, recording music accompanying of refugees from choirs to individual performers, to accompanying reporters from various countries that were trying to facilitate the finding new homes for the refugees. In some cases, I did the interviewing of the refugees. As a matter of fact, ended up on a BBC program being the commentator of a refugees sing back in the 40s. So this was my recording experience and my experience in trying to modify or design equipment in order to do recording, which was difficult those days because of the limitations of equipment. The first of the tape recorders had so many limitations that, and I had the fortune of having at my disposal for a while the International Standards Organization in Geneva, Switzerland, that they helped me to make some capstans with a required precision that nobody made at that time to get recordings, piano recordings in particular, without the accompanying bow and flutter, which of course have long since been disappeared as a problem. I just wanted to say that this has been a wonderful journey for me. I was a music lover and a very minor musician, and it became my profession. And then when I had too much trouble following the orders of my superiors, I had to move up as their boss. And hence I left the audio field and managed businesses and companies, founded a couple of companies, and finally retired approximately a year and a half ago. And I'm glad to be here, and I just wanted to add that while audio has made tremendous progress in the time that I've been involved, problems remain. Problems remain, and the enormous amount of work remains to be done to improve the quality of audio. To this date, it is impossible to get a recording of a symphony orchestra that sounds anything like the orchestra itself. The big problem continues to be the various mid and low frequency difference tones generated by the multiplicity of high frequencies and harmonics. And if one really wants to analyze one, you'll find an enormous number of tones that were never in the music, but they are in the recording, regardless of the method. So we have a long way to go, and I'm proud of Audio Engineering Society and all of Mix Magazine and all of the organizations that have promoted and continue to improve audio. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Crown has a long history of making pro audio gear, good pro audio gear, and in fact, this year is their 60th anniversary. But one of their products that really made an impact, it was in 1967 with a product called the DC300 power amplifier, which even Crown has surpassed these days, but still, this was a classic that really ushered in and defined the era of the modern power amplifier. In 1967 was a perfect time for this product to come out. Suddenly, there was rock concerts that were high SBL and very loud and needed great amplification. Live sound systems were coming into vogue. High listening levels in the recording studio in 1967 started going through the roof, and somebody needed to produce an amplifier that was loud enough to take care of this. And even 40 years after its introduction, there's so many of these DC300s still in service. It's an amazing testament to Crown reliability. And I believe that with us here today, that the original designer of the Crown DC300 is with us, Mr. Gerald Stanley.
Yeah, I must say this is quite humbling. Engineers don't normally get put in the spotlight, but there are some people that are even less in the spotlight. that I think are very important in all of this. One of the people that faithfully drive the screws and solder the joints, the people who work and make these products reliable. Nothing I do as an engineer matters if people don't put it together faithfully. There's a second group that almost never gets mentioned, and that's the group of risk takers. You see, technology doesn't really happen unless people take risks to do things that are new and different. So who are the risk takers? They're you, the users. Because after all, the year's 1967. There have been a number of power amplifiers out. They all break, and fairly soon, you hardly have to abuse them at all. You've already bought N-1 of these things, so why would you try to buy the nth one and think it any better? That wouldn't be rational. And especially when you consider that you would have to go to a tape recorder company, Crown International, located in Elkhart, Indiana. It's where you make band instruments and travel trailers. Okay, that's what Elkhart's famous for. So people took a huge risk, and $685 in 1967 is a different quantity materially than it is today. People put a lot of trust in us, quite frankly, and we're humbled by that. And we want the products that we make today to be as faithful and enduring and as apt to their purpose as the DC300 has proven to be. But hats off to you, the users, who cast your lot with us and gave us a try. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Rupert Neve actually designed the first 1073 mic preamp equalizer module in 1970, and it's, as with a lot of these other products, are still regarded as audio classics. And the 1073 was a line mic preamp designed for, although many of them are still used, or were pulled out of consoles later and used as outboard gear because of their excellence. It was a 3-band equalizer and a passive high-pass filter and a really great EQ section. He does excellent work and continues to do so. But I asked him about the secret to this. I said, "What is this, Rupert? What's the secret to the 1073, and why do people still talk about it?" And he said, "Well, it all came down to the transformers and attention to transformers and attention to detail, because you can download on the internet. You can download a 1073 schematic and you can copy it and make something." The real magic, he said, was actually in the transformers and how they were winding them and their attention to details, which really made them amazing. Although the 1073 is actually currently being recreated by AMS Neve, who Rupert sold his interest in years ago. Still, it's an amazing testament to Rupert Neve and his skill. We'll move up here now to 1971, which it's interesting, all these products we've talked about so far pretty much are like, well, it was in the old days, or I wish I could get one, and gosh, here's a product you can go upstairs and buy today. And it's pretty amazing after so many years that the AKG C414 is still in production, still revered, and still being improved. Development of the 414 actually came from AKG's engineer Carl Peschel, who took the CK12 capsule from their C12A tube microphone and paired it with high-quality FET electronics that became available in the late 60s, and created an AKG microphone called the C412. A year later, he added another bass roll-off position and a fourth polar pattern and created the first C414. And the evolution of the C414 continued in the mid-70s. A gifted and wonderful engineer who retired 2 years ago, Norbert Sobel, retired 2 years ago, a great guy, and he supervised the 414 design for all those many years up to just to the current models, and making sure that every level of it continued to be a really remarkable and excellent microphone. In fact, the new ones, of course, have LED displays that tell you what polar pattern you're on, assuming your eyes aren't good enough anymore and you can't really just see the switch markings. And a fifth wide cardioid position to improve it further and make it more versatile. Mr. Mike Torlone, who can accept this on behalf of the company, the team, all the great engineers that worked on it.
Thank you very much, George. Thanks to all the people at Mix, and thanks to all the people involved with the Tech Awards program. Don Davis of SynodCon fame used to talk about a principle, and he always used to talk about the shoulders of those we stand upon. And I am very fortunate to have stood on the shoulders of Norbert Sobel and Carl Peschel. The people at AKG Vienna were people that understood really good sound. We put our heart and souls into all the products that we make, and it really just makes us incredibly proud when we get things like this. Thank you very much.
The following award is to a company by the name of MCI, but it's not really an award to MCI. It's really the embodiment of MCI was a man by the name of G. Parnid. And this guy was an audio innovator. He created the first 24-track tape recorder using a modified Ampex 300 in 1965. And later on, he developed the first tape autolocators in 1972. But this particular award is for his role in commercializing the inline console and bringing us into the era of modern console design. But it wasn't Jeep working alone on this. Actually, one of Jeep's associates on this was a fellow by the name of David Harrison, the late David Harrison, who founded Harrison Consoles. At the time, Dave Harrison didn't run a console company at all. He was a Nashville audio dealer, and he carried MCI products and sold them to the studio community there. And he approached Jeep with this idea of this new concept of an inline console design based on some custom consoles that had been made by Dan Flickinger. So G. Parnid and MCI engineer Lutzmeyer and worked with Harrison, with Dave Harrison, to refine and create this JH400 console. In 1972, the industry was much different. Most of the consoles at the time were custom made. And Jeep had an idea, much like Henry Ford, of using his modern assembly line techniques to make consoles that everybody could afford, sounded good, were easy to service, based essentially on standardized models that could be customized with whatever options could be added to make the console exactly fit your needs. For example, one of the great options available for this console was quad panning, to take advantage of 1972's huge resurgence in quad recording, and we know where that went. But fortunately, you could get the console without the quad panning and have a wonderful stereo console as well. So the JH400 offered an affordable console to the studio business that was growing. In fact, in 1977, a Billboard studio poll gave MCI the leading share in consoles designs. And the MCI JH400 led to further consoles, the 500 and so on, and continued the tradition of excellence with MCI. G. Parnid actually sold MCI to Sony in 1982 and retired from the business. Unfortunately, he passed away, but he will long be remembered as a pioneer who made significant advancements in the state of pro audio. And here to accept this Hall of Fame induction for G. Parnid is his widow, Carla Harned.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Carla Harned, and G. Parnid was my boss, mentor, and husband. My thanks to George Peterson and Mix Magazine for the honor of inducting MCI's JH416 console into their TECnology Hall of Fame. Jeep, I'm sure, would be very pleased and proud. George's write-up about Jeep said that he was an innovator, and I couldn't agree more. With that in mind, I'd like to tell you a story about Jeep's innovation and how it enabled him to get MCI off the ground. In the late 1960s, Jeep received orders from both Atlantic Records and Criteria Recording in Miami for custom boards. The only trouble was he didn't have enough capital to order all of the components to build the two boards. He was in a real quandary as to what he should do. The Dun & Bradstreet salesman had recently visited him, trying to sell him a set of credit listing books. Jeep, of course, had turned him down because he didn't have enough money. But suddenly, he had his eureka moment. He placed a call to the salesman telling him that he had changed his mind about the books. The guy said he would be right over. When he arrived, Jeep had the check already made out. He handed it to the salesman, but as the salesman went to grab it, he pulled it back a little and said, "The check is yours, but it comes with a string attached." Jeep said, "In exchange for buying this set of books, I would like to have MCI rated with a C+ credit rating." The salesman heaved a sigh of relief and said, "No problem. A new set of books is going to press next week." Jeep waited a couple of weeks and then decided to give the new credit rating a test drive. So he called one of the component suppliers in South Florida and said, "This is Jeep Harned of MCI, and I have a substantial order to place with you." The guy replied, "Who?" Jeep, he said, "Jeep Harned of MCI. Surely you know of us. We're listed in Dun & Bradstreet." Jeep said he could hear the guy thumbing through the book saying, "MCI, MCI. Oh, yes, you want to place an order? Fine." And so began MCI's saga. Thank you.
What a great story. Thank you so much. The first Eventide harmonizer, Model H for harmonizer, and 910 for what? Well, 910 is the one after 909. According to its developer, Anthony Agnello, who happens to be here. And evidently, he was asked by Eventide's founder, Richard Factor, to come up with a harmony processor. But it's not the one that you see in the picture that we all love and the studios bought and developed into the Ultra Harmonizer series, etc. But evidently, it was some sort of beast with a musical keyboard mounted on top of a box of electronics. And the harmonies were created by, playing musical intervals with the music keyboard on the top. They got rid of the keyboard and added it as an option, and it became a wonderful rack mount box that you see here. And this is the box that, became the part of the signature sound of Frank Zappa. Put one in his guitar rack. Tony Visconti used it for the drum sounds on David Bowie's classic Young Americans. Tony Platt used it on AC/DC's Back in Black. Eddie Van Halen had a pair in his guitar rig. They were slightly detuned opposite ways to give him part of his signature sound. And Tom Lord Alge used a similar setup on Steve Winwood's vocals for Back in the High Life. The same thing with two slightly detuned H910 harmonizers. And in fact, this dual detuning preset was so popular that Eventide recreated it with a dual 910 program in the H3000 Ultra Harmonizer that came out 12 years later. So here with us today is Anthony Agnello, Richard, one of these guys, both of you, either one. If you think about the tribulations of trying to create a product like this with 1975 technology, these guys are really wizards, absolutely. So.
Well, actually, I have an introduction and a story. First of all, as you said, it was quite the tribulation to put this thing together. For him. It was no tribulation at all for me. I am the founder of Eventide, and Tony actually is the designer of the product. And it's probably one of the really neatest things that we had in those days. And it's sure good to see it up there. But I'm going to go off base for just a second to tell Carla a story, because you made one tiny little mistake in introducing MCI, saying they had the first tape autolocator.
Yeah.
Eventide, in fact, had the first tape autolocator, and it was really a funny device because we didn't have proper digital circuitry then. There was no tiny little computer that MCI took advantage of. And the way our tape autolocator worked is you press rewind, tape goes back and it passes 0. It's past 0. Okay, let's go forward again. Backward, forward, backward, forward, backward, forward, until finally it's stopped at the right spot. And then Jeep put together a good one, which actually slowed down and stopped where it should, and we got out of the autolocator business, but we had all these ICs left. And I noticed this is the very first digital product that's been mentioned here. And that's how we got our start. And Tony, as I say, is the guy who designed the product, so let him say a few words.
Thank you, Richard. And thank you, George and Mix. I think it's really wonderful that George has driven this and created a forum to capture the history of audio. It's a really important thing. And what's particularly gratifying is, if I understand this correctly, people actually vote for these products. These are not something that are picked out of a hat. So these are actual users who've used these things. So the story of the harmonizer is, as Richard said, it's a very early digital audio product, but it's not the first digital audio product. Richard hired me at Eventide. It was my first job. I was living in Brooklyn.
We were both about 5 or 6 at the time.
Right. I think, that's about right. But I was taking I was attending City College at night for my master's, and Eventide was a convenient subway stop, and Richard was kind enough to give me a chance to work there. And what Richard had created at that point were digital delay lines. I mean, if you think back, it's really difficult to delay an analog signal. There was something called a Cooper time cube, which was basically a garden hose. So one of the first applications for digital audio, this is way back prehistory, made the stuff out of rocks and wood, but very first applications for digital audio was simply to delay an audio signal for double tracking. And Richard had created something called the 1745A delay line, which was basically a field of shift registers. And along came an innovation called a random access memory, and Richard built the 1745M, which instead of using shift registers, used RAM. And with RAM, he was able to build a module to change pitch. And my first job at Eventide was keeping those delay lines going, which was a challenge. And I realized that, this pitch change is a really interesting effect. Sitting here looking at it, it reminded me that when I laid out the front panel, I like symmetry, but I couldn't figure out what to do what to do for a fourth knob. And since one of the knobs was feedback, Richard contributed anti-feedback, which basically is just a random pitch change around unity to break up feedback modes, and there's the product. And I guess I'll just close with the one after 909. That was one of the cover stories for the model number. Another cover story was, I am a Beatles fan, and I thought John Lennon's birthday was 9/10. It's actually October 9th, but back then I didn't realize that the British did it the other way around. So.
This is a product that came about from a gentleman who's not here today, but he will be at AES tomorrow, by the name, a brilliant fellow by the name of Barry Blesser. Anyway, Barry Blesser was one of the people who helped launching Lexicon. And in 1976, he was working with EMT, the German company, who had developed earlier analog reverb machines, and they collaborated and created this this beast that's really is about 3 feet tall, weighs a ton, and was the first commercial digital reverb. And it was it actually was a team effort between Barry Blesser and Carl Bader, who both share the patent. This thing had 400 ICs inside it to provide its 16K of memory. There are lines running down the front of the unit on the front face, the freestanding face. And I always thought it was a cool design thing. And I was talking to Barry a couple months ago, and he said, no, that's not a cool design thing. This thing was completely covered on the outside with heat sinks. I mean, the thing was essentially a pressure cooker. But the fact is, it actually sounded pretty good. And the algorithms of Mr. Blesser and Mr. Bader were actually pretty amazing. To accept the award for, and on behalf of Mr. Barry Blesser, is David Griesinger. Mr. David Griesinger.
I do want to say, however, a few words at the behest of Barry. First, he asked me specifically, first of all, I want to thank the Mix for this honor, which I think is richly deserved for Barry. And it was an honor for me to accept the award on his behalf. At his request, I wanted to say a few words about his colleague, Carl Otto Bader, who many of us know as Carlo Bader. Carl Bader, this product, the EMT250, was very much a joint development between Carlo Bader and Barry Blesser. Bader was a tonemaster. Many of us knew him, a musician, a very fine engineer, and the marketing genius behind much of what AKG produced. So it was the collaboration between Carlo and Barry that produced this device. Barry's superb knowledge of digital audio combined with Bader's very fine knowledge of the needs of the recording industry in terms of reverb and the ears that he had for knowing when a sound was really usable and what wasn't. And Barry personally said to me that how much that he appreciated, how much he learned from Carlo about how to listen to these algorithms and how to make them really sound good. And I want personally to say a little bit about Barry Blesser because I think maybe too few of us in this audience know him and what he's responsible for. As you mentioned, George mentioned, he was partly responsible for the beginning of Lexicon. It was Barry Blesser's contribution to digital audio sampling, digitization, and memory that made the first Lexicon product, well, not the first Lexicon product, but the first digital audio delay line, which was the Gotham Delta T unit. This was Barry Blesser's design, and with the help of Steve Temmer's cash and the vision of Francis Lee, they formed this product at Lexicon and made a success of it. And so Barry was really responsible for the first successful digital audio device. And through the years, he went on to write, when he was, before he was president of the AES, the first really fundamental papers on sampling theory. He was the one who suggested the use of dither to reduce the distortion inherent in the sampling process. Barry's contribution goes on and on. I will mention a personal story. Back in about 1977, when I was working on the beginning of digital reverberation myself, I had a chance encounter with Barry. And I said, Barry, I've been working on digital reverberation algorithms, and the progress is very slow. And he said, you should go back to 1962 and look up the paper by Manfred Schroeder on digital reverberation, which he had done when he was in Bell Labs. And in that paper was the suggestion to use something called the all-pass reverberation network, which was a very new concept to me. Barry had done a thorough search of the literature. I did a search too, but I didn't go back to 1962. Remember, this is 1977. And Barry had done so. And his suggestion to me to look up that paper was made the progress toward what became my reverberator possible, basically. And it would have been very slow coming without that. So thank you all, and thank Nix for this honor.
Thank you very much. The 3M digital audio mastering system was actually the first digital multi-track tape machine. It came out in 1978, and of course 3M at the time was well known for having a long history of building great analog machines, and they decided to spent 2 years of researching with the BBC to create a 32-channel digital recording and mastering and editing system. And the system consisted of the 32-channel deck that you see here, the edit controllers between it, and a similar 4-track deck, both of which used half-inch tape, 16-bit, 50 kilohertz. And the interesting part about both these decks is when a tape manufacturer creates a tape recorder, you can be sure it'll operate at 45 IPS. So these things whip through tape like there is no tomorrow. And but actually, they sounded pretty amazing. Some of the early records that were recorded on this were the first Flim and the BBs album by Tom Young on his DMP records, which was actually for years was quite one of the standards for playing in audio showrooms. And also Lee Hirschberg's recording of Ry Cooder's Bop Till You Drop, Donald Fagen's A Nightfly, engineered by Roger Nichols, were among some of the early things recorded on these machines. And the great thing about a system was that the entire system cost $150,000, which compared to spending $20,000, $25,000 on an analog machine looked great. And of course, running at 45 IPS, it was going to be an expensive proposition. But fortunately, digital multitracks improved after that. In 1981, Sony was looking at the future of digital audio, and they assembled a team. And the PCM F1 system essentially had the recording processor, and this is shown with the accompanying power supply because it was also DC powerable as a portable system. But you would plug this into your beta deck. You essentially convert audio into essentially like what it was a moving barcode, as a monochrome video stream that could be recorded on a videotape recorder. And these were $2,000, which in 1981, the idea of buying a digital 2-track for $2,000 was absolutely amazing. And so a lot of pros latched onto this. Of course, editing this tape was pretty much almost impossible. You had to use assembly editing techniques, which at best would give you plus or minus a frame when you're doing your edits. And if you've ever worked in that, trying to do phase or working with tracks, or a frame is a very big place. Also, these things operated at a video sampling frequency of 44.056 rather than 44.1, which if people later try to do digital transfers from their original masters, and they go, well, I got an F1, but we're going to take a digital output, because later products did have a digital output. You would take it out, and of course the pitch would be wrong. I have a number of friends in the live sound industry who would go out on tour with acts, and they would print they would take an F1 with them, and they would make a tape with the board mix going into the digital audio tracks, and hang 2 microphones at the mix position to add the room ambience, and create 4-track recordings and archive stuff. Mr. Paul Fucino from Sony.
No, I wasn't born before this product. I was born long before this product came out, and actually, I started working at Sony in 1991, not when this product was out. Actually, when this product was introduced, I was working for another company called Panasonic Techniques. And we had also introduced a PCM digital recorder at around the same time. And we were battling it out head-to-head with Sony for positioning of this consumer product in the professional world, still trying to desperately get consumers to believe that they could record digital onto their VHS cassette tapes, but that didn't work, as George noted. But the pros did like it. And shortly after this product came, the factories started introducing, much to my dismay, being at Techniques and being in charge of turntables, started introducing a compact disc, which was a much more realistic configuration of taking digital sound and trying to bring it to the consumer. We also battled it out at that point with Sony. And as history would tell, we lost that battle. But instead, I went to work for Sony. So now I'm here, standing before you, graciously accepting an award of a product that changed my career path. But nevertheless, I'm very happy to be here. I thank the Mix organization and George personally for recognizing this product and what it contributed in its small way towards the evolution of digital. And if you're interested to see where digital has come today, please stop by the Sony booth and I'll show you another really cool product that we've got. So thanks. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Paul. I'd like to thank the AES for their support of the event and providing this wonderful room. I'd like to thank all of you for coming. And for all of you that made contributions to audio, wouldn't be the same without you, any of you. And we have Mr. Resner here who will make a few concluding remarks.
I just want to thank George Peterson. Because, you know, making history exciting sometimes, you know, this is a real challenge and a real talent. And boy, can he do it, huh? Especially when you're talking about technical matters. So thank you, George. And there's only one other thing that I really want to say for you to carry away. I want everyone to be real clear on the distinction between Mix Magazine, excuse me, something in the throat, and the Mix Foundation, which is actually a 501c3 charity, which was established by us in 1991 when Mix was purchased by Norman Lear. I don't know how many of you know that Norman Lear owned Mix Magazine for 5 minutes. But Norman is a philanthropist, as you all know, and he thought it would be a good idea if the Tech Awards, since we were giving money to charitable purposes like hearing and education, was presented by a foundation. So the Technology Hall of Fame and the Tech Awards are presented by the Mix Foundation, which is in fact a separate organization from Mix Magazine. But of course, we wouldn't be here were it not for the magnanimous support of Mix Magazine. So we thank them, and we thank all of you for coming tonight. Thank you.